Data's evolutionary journey started out like all journeys, non-existent. However, the evolution of data has been exponential since the dawn of the internet and the birth of the companies that followed. Fast forward a couple decades to today, and you may notice that data is everywhere. Raffael Marty, VP of Research and Intelligence at Forcepoint, talks about this evolution, his own journey into tech, the serial founder experience, and much more on this episode of IT Visionaries. IT Visionaries is created by the team at mission.org and brought to you by the Salesforce Customer 360 platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Build connected experience, empower every employee, and deliver continuous innovation with the customer at the center of everything you do. Learn more at salesforce.com/platform.
Welcome to IT Visionaries. I'm Ian Faison, Chief Content Officer here at mission.org. And we have in studio, Rafi, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going?
It's great to have you. This is going to be fun. You have a really interesting background and you have a really interesting role at Forcepoint. But before we get into all of that, how did you get into technology in the first place?
Oh, good question. I guess when I grew up, I always had a knack for disassembling electric devices, even like irons and whatever, just plugged them into the outlet and fuses would go off and sometimes it'd get hurt. I was just fascinated by these machines. And at some point, like second grade, my best friend got an Apple II. And that was just fantastic. We started programming Logo on that thing. And I remember I was fascinated that if you multiplied a number with a number that was smaller than 1, so 0.8, it would actually be smaller, the result, than what you started with. And that was just weird to me. I still remember that. Because when you multiply something, usually you get more.
Yeah,
you got less. So somehow all this stuff just fascinated me, was these solving puzzles, understanding systems. So that's how I got into that, I guess.
And flash forward to now. So you are the Chief Research and Intelligence Officer. What goes into that?
Well, Forcepoint is one of the large security firms, and we have a number of different products, from firewalls to endpoint and insider threat protection tools and so on. And all these tools you can think of as basically engines that act on certain data and certain signals, right? Like a firewall looks at network traffic and will block it based on certain conditions. But all these products also need a certain amount of security, intelligence, or knowledge that goes into them. So my group basically provides all of that content. So they're surveying the internet and the whatever darker corners of the internet as well, to understand what are the latest attacks, what are the latest attackers, the campaigns that are active, and build content for the different systems to actually block those kinds of things. And that's sort of a lot of machinery we've built where we help all the different products be configured with the security intelligence. But then there's another side which is much more interesting, which is understanding human behavior. And we're doing a lot of research, call it artificial intelligence, that we're applying to sort of characterizing the behavior of systems and the behavior of humans. And we're applying that to all of our products in the end.
So is Forcepoint X Labs, is this like a special group? Like how are you involved in that? Do you lead that? Like what is
yeah,
that?
That's the department I run. And that's all of the research and intelligence people, basically, that we have like 7 locations around the world where these people sit. There are security researchers, there's a psychologist on the team, there's counterintelligence people. So people that help us understand the security landscape and build these protection content for all the different products.
And then, so how much do you work with, the CIO, the CTO, the CISO? Like, how do you work with other senior leaders? Are you creating product? Are you working with customers?
So we are involved in a lot of the strategic decisions and understanding, well, where's the market going? So we're providing sort of input on, okay, what's possible from an AI or from an analytics standpoint? Where is the market going? Where are the attackers going? How can we prevent these things? So we're often at the table when there's strategic conversations. It's almost, we're an extension of the office of the CTO. So we have a lot of weight there in a lot of these conversations, kind of like the CTO itself does. And then interacting with actually almost every single leader in the company, CMO, quite a lot on how do we message this stuff? How do we build frameworks and what are use cases and how do we bundle that up in a way that makes sense to the security audience? Working with the chief legal officer quite a bit because there is a lot of conversation around privacy and what are we allowed to do, right? We, like as researchers, we want to see all the data as much as we can.
Yeah.
If we didn't have to care about PII, it would be nice if we didn't have to.
Yeah, it sounds
but
great.
Obviously, we have to, right? And we have to walk within these legal boundaries. So we have a lot of conversations there. How do we build systems with a privacy-first approach? And what does that mean? What are the contracts we need to have in place with our customers? And what do we have to do internal that my researchers can access some of the data? And there's all kinds of process involved in that. So I work with pretty much every single leader in the company, which is really, really fun as well.
That is really fun. When you're talking to them, are you sharing the ways that you can kind of cross-reference or draw insights from your background in shooting crossbow and air rifle for the Swiss national team?
You dug up quite a bit on my background. It's interesting. Like target shooting is a very individual sport, and I did that from like 12 to age 12 to like 26, and I was in a national team for a while. And I think it just teaches you to deal with stressful situations, right?
Yeah.
Because you're on your own, you're sitting there, and it could be in a board meeting. Now you're put on the spot. You have to like deliver this content, and you might be really nervous because your jaw might be on the line. And how do you present this? And it just teaches you that, you know what, like be in the present. You know your stuff, right? Like you trained for this. Right? You have a career that gave you the spot that you're sitting in. So that you're probably qualified to be there. And so just focus on the moment. And I think that the biggest lesson, which is kind of interesting, that I learned is have fun.
Yeah.
No matter what it is, right? Like if you don't have fun anymore, you're in the wrong place. And it's actually, I realized this from a 16-year-old athlete on my team, and I coached the national team in Switzerland. And she was just always so happy.
Yeah.
And at some point, I'm like, at this international competition, I'm like, are you not nervous? She's like, of course I am, but I'm looking really forward to this. I'm so excited and I'm having fun. I'm like, oh, boom, yes, this makes sense, right? Where you see all these other athletes like super focused and are trying to like come out of their best. And it seems like they're not having fun. But the ones that are actually having fun are probably doing better if you watch that at some point.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's like a corollary where it's like you either need to have nobody believe in you or one person to believe in you, right? It's like if you have nobody, then it's like it's you against the world. But if like that one person, you can kind of draw from that.
Yeah.
So you spent a few years at Splunk, kind of early days, right?
Super early, yeah. We're, I don't know, like 50, 60 people in a small office in San Francisco. Is really fun.
Yeah, we've had a bunch of Splunk leaders on IT Visionaries recently. Huge focus on big data.
Yeah.
Think that this is clearly going to be something with the amounts of data being accessed every single day that if you're not a data organization, you better buckle up. I'm curious, just like what are your kind of where's the market now on big data and how's that linked to security?
It's interesting. Like when I started my career in the early 2000s, we did big data back in the day, right? We looked at all this, like Splunk, right? We looked at all this data coming in from these IT systems. We didn't call it big data. It was just data analytics, math, and statistics, right? I think back then people were like, oh, yeah, okay, sure. Look at your log files and figure out what your systems are doing. But it was a very, very niche thing. And if you look today, everything is focused around the data. I think it's a little dangerous. I think we over-rotated a little bit too much on relying on the data. And we're not honest with ourselves anymore in terms of, well, there is bias in the data, right?
Yeah.
There's bias in the algorithms we have. But there is some fantastic use cases we couldn't solve if we didn't have all the data. Look at all the deep learning things that have been happening over the last 5-6 years. Speech recognition, image recognition. That is only possible because we have huge amounts of data that we can draw from to train these systems. So I think there's so many problems we can solve with looking at the data. We have to be a little careful. History is not a predictor of the future.
Yeah, great point.
But there's so many things we can learn from it. And security is not any different from any of the other disciplines, right? Like looking at the data, what happened, learning from it, profiling things. That's just more and more where we have to go to even get ahead of the attackers out there.
Yeah.
If we don't do that, we have no chance.
Let's talk about the attackers, because I think that, what are some of the things that you've seen from your vantage point on what's going on with, I don't want to say your customers, but just with the general market on the huge problems that you're seeing kind of every day that people are really concerned about?
Yeah, it's interesting looking at what customers come back with, the problems they need help with. I think there's definitely an increased focus on what is known as sort of the insider threat problem. For quite a while, people were kind of laughing at that. You're like, yeah, sure, it is a problem, but the external attackers are much bigger of a problem. That has shifted quite a bit, I think. And I think the way we look at it is, in the end, what really matters is when your critical data or IP is being touched and being leaked or exfiltrated in a malicious way, whether that's an insider doing that, right? Someone turning against the company and exfiltrating data in some way, or whether someone hacks into the systems and then steals the data. So it's both times, it's data that leaks. And we're focusing very much on the intersection of when the users access the critical data. So how can we characterize that interaction and really learn, how does data move around? How do people touch their critical data? And so then when either one happens, a malicious insider or an external attacker coming in, we'll see deviations in that behavior and hopefully be able to catch them there when they basically right in the act there. And then that's something that a lot of the global CISOs that we talk to are really worried about, their intellectual property, and whether that's in the end espionage or whether it's an insider. It's in the end, it's the same thing that we're looking for.
I've seen some kind of like recent numbers on just like the cybersecurity market in general right now. Is like essentially you could make a pretty good argument that it's like 25% funded. Like there's like so much that needs to be done. Mm-hmm. And it's just something that people just historically have not invested nearly enough into.
And it's interesting because you could also look at it in a different way. You could say we spent trillions of dollars to protect our systems and data. And where are we?
Yeah,
right. It's like,
indeed.
It's crazy. And I feel like there's a number of technologies out there that companies just feel they have to buy them and deploy them. Mm-hmm. We can get in a religious war, but threat intelligence is one of them, where you're buying these threat intelligence feeds that tell you these are all the bad IP addresses in the internet. You should never connect to one of those because they're bad websites or bad machines, whatever. If you look at the return on that, it's actually not great, but everybody feels like they need to have it. The question really becomes, as a chief security officer, well, what technologies do you need to invest in to keep your organization secure? And that's again where we're trying to turn the table a little bit to say, you know what? Sure, we call it sort of security hygiene. Sure, you need to do that, right? Some threat intelligence is important. We help you with our firewalls to protect yourself from botnets and things like that. But in the end, it comes back to what I mentioned earlier. It's really about, well, once someone is in, hopefully we caught them, but if they're in and now start modifying your critical data, stealing your critical data, or messing with the availability of your systems, that's where we want to catch them. And that's a little bit of a smaller surface we have to monitor and understand than everything that's going on. Right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the security industry needs a little bit of a shake-up and maybe a cleaning to start focusing on the stuff that really matters and not then helping these CISOs not to waste money.
Yeah, I mean, with bring your own device, with all this stuff, I mean, I'm curious, like, the level of threats seems like, or the level of your exposure or, devices and all those things, it just seems like it's going to get exponentially worse and worse. Like, it doesn't seem like that's something that the cat is out of the bag. So if that's the case, then what do you do?
And it's exactly it, right? Like we just won't be able to control everything. And from that perspective, if you can get a handle on the critical data in your organization, or the things, call it resources that you really care about, right? In certain verticals, you're really worried about your manufacturing line, right? Like that cannot be touched. It always has to be up and so on. So get really tight control around that. Make sure that all your connections to that from the rest of the network, from the internet and so on, are really highly monitored. But obviously you have to first sort of understand what's even there, right? You know, oh, there is this other way in here to the manufacturing layer. There's not just one entry point, but there's two.
Yeah.
So for first of all, understanding that, having a lay of the land, and then starting to protect where it really matters, I think is really key.
What are some examples that you've seen kind of recently that are, I don't want to say like newer versions of the problem manifesting, but some examples that maybe you've seen from, I know you need to anonymize customers and all that, but I'm curious, like some things that you saw that you were particularly like, wow, that's kind of a new thing.
Oh, that's a good question. We see so many old problems wrapped in a new container. There's so many. I mean, it was just last week was Black Hat and DEF CON, two of the largest security conferences in the world, back to back in Vegas. And walking around there, listening to what's going on, it's some of the talks are super scary, right? And I feel like the attackers are finding more and more ways, and some of them are super sophisticated, how to get into the systems. But I mean, that's never going to stop, right? And there's always a new story. There's tomorrow something new, and someone finds a way to circumvent this other safeguard that we just put in, right? Like when we came out with facial recognition for phones, well, it took, I don't know how long, a week or two, and someone broke it already, and they built something that could imitate you, right? Like everything we put out there, the attackers will find a way in. And sometimes it's intellectually incredibly interesting and amazing how they found out how to break into these systems. We can spend so many resources on that. I could have a research team of 400 people doing nothing else than investigating the latest thing. And there are security companies that do that. But I'm always going to be behind, right? Because if I haven't seen it yet, I can't analyze it. And so that's exactly that shift that I'm talking about, where sure, there might be some really cool new attack that just figured out how to break iPhones or whatever it is. We'll always have one more. And there's going to be another story tomorrow in the news. But how can we shift that to start saying, you know what? We didn't know about this attack, but we're still pretty confident we're secure from what happens afterwards when they're really trying to steal the crown jewels.
What does your team focus on if they're not focusing on those type of, how they get in the door?
So there's some of that, right? We're looking at, obviously we need to set the bar high enough that people don't just walk in, right? So you have to have some kind of offense. But after that, we're focusing a lot on understanding human behavior. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a psychologist on the team, for example, where we built a framework that helps us understand, well, what are the things about a person that I can characterize that are relevant to assess their risk afterwards, right? A very simple example, she actually gave a talk at Black Hat this year talking about curiosity. And that's it's maybe not the very best attribute of a person that you can characterize, but I think it brings the point across really well. It's like the more curious someone is, they might actually expose themselves to a number of attacks, like phishing. Well, if you're a very curious person, you cannot resist clicking that link, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so if I can characterize that.
But the prince has $1 million for you, right?
Oh my God, I just got another one yesterday, and it was someone had incriminating pictures of me and this and that. Oh. And I'm like, whoa, okay.
The IRS calls me all the time.
I'm sure.
I don't know if the IRS is calling from Iowa. It doesn't seem like it makes sense. Or they're calling from my hometown. That's my new favorite.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? These attackers get sophisticated, right? And they're tricking you in any way. And so we're focusing on what are the attributes that I can measure about a person, their curiosity, their stressors, right? If you had, if someone pushes your buttons, right? Understanding what your buttons are and understanding how can we even gather that data to understand when your buttons are, or what your buttons are, and then when they're getting pushed, and then sort of applying that risk to you when you're doing certain things. And if I know you are a curious person, then I might look at the emails that you get even closer to make sure that there's no link in there that you could click, right?
Yeah.
Versus a person that's super careful, is not curious at all, right? They're super conservative. Then I might apply different safeguards, basically. And so that's one huge area, this human factors research. And then the second piece to that is security has been traditionally in this world of 0 and 1. You're either allowed to do something or you're blocked. And it just doesn't work, right? That's where you get into problems of having humongous lists of policies that you don't even understand anymore what happens. And what we're doing is we're shifting that to a risk-based conversation. So that I say, I saw you doing these 5 things. You suddenly showed up from an IP in China. You have a very strange browser that you're using. You're trying to access data you have never accessed before. Each of these signals alone might not be that bad, right? I might be traveling to China and it's completely fine to be coming from there. I might be using a computer at the hotel, but now I'm going to the critical data. I'm accessing weird folders. I do all these things and suddenly it's like, hang on, now the risk is too high. This is not you. So then rather than blocking you completely, I might not let you to get to the critical business files anymore. I might still let you browse the web or browse to our public website, right? But I might also use more monitoring. So we call this risk adaptive protection, where we basically focus everything around risk rather than 0-1 decisions.
That's like when I was in school, we couldn't go to dicksportinggoods.com because it was like dicks.com
Exactly. Yeah.
Or whatever. But the same sort of thing, right? It's like, oh, hey, you're traveling and immediately your credit card shut off.
Yes.
And you're like, now I can't buy gas. This is not great. Are there things that you've seen from an employee experience standpoint where this has had either a really positive effect or negative effect?
Yeah, and this is huge. We actually, in one of our slogans, we say free to good, right? Like, I think the security products got a very bad rep because we always block you. We're always preventing you from getting work done, right? And you get annoyed. Well, we want to get out of the way as much as we can, right? Like, don't just block things, but go into this risk-based approach where maybe certain things you can't do anymore. And so I think that's really, really key. We can't be in the way of the user's activities. And security has gotten a really bad rep in that sense. So that's just key, where the experience of the user should not be impacted by security tools. And if it is, then that tool is not doing what it should be doing.
And then how do you, I'll say politely, but how do you politely recommend that people are not doing something? I mean, I kind of feel like most people don't want to go down a harmful path,
right,
in, the vast majority of use cases. And it's like, they just need a nudge of like, do you realize you're doing something dumb?
I mean, this is also where you can get really creative, right? I've seen approaches in companies where instead of in your web browsing, sometimes you get the block page from your web proxy that says you can't go here, right? You can do that. And for certain things, you want to do that, right? Certain content, you just know that's not something that anyone should go to at work. But then in other cases, you could just say, hey, you are the first person ever in the entire organization of 10,000 people to go to this website. Are you sure you want to go there? Right?
That's hilarious.
And it's actually very effective because then you're like, whoa, they're looking at what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
They're recommending I might not want to go here. And I have another chance to verify, is it really the right URL? Is it really where I want to go? And then I can still say, just kidding. Let me not go there, right? So there's all kinds of creative ways that you can work with the user rather than just preventing them to do things. But the users are not, as you were saying, they're not always just malicious, right? Like, I think working with the user is actually really key.
Well, it's also like, you drop a letter off a domain and you end up somewhere you shouldn't, right? I mean,
exactly,
that happens all
right.
the time.
Exactly. Right.
And then they're probably going to be embarrassed anyways. So who writes that copy? I mean, like, is your team working on that stuff? Like, had those little nudges?
For certain products, like even on the DLP side, the data leak prevention tool, right? Sometimes just having another check, where a lot of the tools today, I send a document to one of the exfiltration use cases is always that the employee sends data or an attachment to their personal email account, because that's how they exfiltrate data, right?
Totally.
To Gmail or my accounts. Well, rather than just recording that and the security team is going to run after that, you can just pop up a dialogue and say, hey, did you realize you're just sending this attachment to your personal email account? Are you sure that's okay with the security policy of the company? And then they can still decide, yeah, I want to do that, it's fine, or no. And so there's all kinds of different places where we're trying to insert these little nudges, because just letting it happen and recording it is sometimes not really good anyways, because you have so many alerts suddenly. I mean, how many times does that happen?
Seriously.
And the security team just can't work on all this. So I'd rather put that in the face of the user and they realize, oh, I'm actually being watched and I should probably not try anything more, because the event is still recorded, right? And I can still go in and review that or send it to the manager. And if it happens 10 times in a month, so there's all kinds of interesting things you can do that don't always have to just be a 0 or 1 decision that way.
You wrote 2 books earlier in your career, Applied Security Visualization and The Security Data Lake. Weighty tomes, you say. 500 pages.
That was the first book. Yeah. The second was only like 40 or so.
So, flash forward to now, I'm curious, what has changed about, data visualization? What are you seeing now?
Data visualization is interesting. I tried to start a company at some point to build sort of a visual analytics tool the vision was just, I have all this data. I have a terabyte of data. I give you that and I ask you what's in here. And the tool should just help you explore that and say, look, here's what I see, and guide me through the data and everything in a visual way. And nothing has changed in the last 10 years, right? We can process larger amounts of data. We can run these machine learning algorithms and this and that. But I haven't seen a tool that really, I just load the data and it helps me explore and understand what is really happening inside of here. We definitely have gotten to higher scale, to more nodes and edges on the display and things like that. But fundamentally, the problem of making data actionable, we haven't really done that much on that.
Yeah.
Visualization is also a hard part, because often it's to explore the data. But once I explored it, I don't want to do another visualization of it. I want to automate that stuff. So how many times do I really go and do the visual exploration? Of course, there's also another side of visualization, which is data representation or communication, right? In dashboards and summaries and so on. That's interesting, but to a certain degree, right? Everybody has seen dashboards and you use Tableau or something to do a little bit of investigation. But the visual analytics component, really, really deeply understand the data, I'm still super passionate about it. I haven't been able to work on it much recently, but I think there's still lots of work to be done there.
I actually wanted to ask you about your Multitime founder, which is, I feel like we have folks that do startups and then back in enterprise and kind of back and forth. But I'm curious, like, what were those experiences like, and kind of how does that help you in your current role?
It was roller coaster.
Yeah.
Incredible, amazing, frustrating. It's been everything. I got super lucky. I founded a company called Loggly right out of Splunk. We're like, why don't we put this thing into the cloud? And we were like, Splunk shouldn't put it in the cloud because the business model just wouldn't make any sense. So we have a shot here.
Yeah. And
it was fantastic. We raised VC money, and back in the day when we started it, I didn't know what an MVP was or what a pivot is or whatever. And I remember we got lucky and got funding by True Ventures, and we got into this startup community, all the founders, and suddenly we got exposed to this whole new world. And it was absolutely incredible. The connections, understanding the business side of things much better, really focusing on customer, right? Like there you live it every day. In a bigger company, you can get away with not thinking about the customer too much. But in the startup, you need to make money at some point. So definitely learned a tremendous amount. And, it also helped burst a bubble a little bit. I think living in the Bay Area, a lot of people that come here, they're like, oh my God, all these startups and everybody makes so much money and everybody's a successful entrepreneur. Well, it's actually not true, right?
Yeah, big time. Yep.
You dig in and you're like, a lot of people had a failure, and sometimes it's pretty bad, right? Like where you feel sorry for them. What happened? The founders not getting along, and investors and founders, and this you hear everything, right? And it was super interesting to see that side as well, and getting a little bit of a perspective. And it's interesting because a lot of people ask me, it's like, oh, you started companies and all these things. Why are you in a 3,000 people company now?
Yeah.
And I'm like, guess what? I have a lot of resources available to me, right? I make okay money, right? I have much less risk. I don't have to live on the hope that my startup is going to succeed and bring in a lot of money and hope that I didn't get diluted too much by the VCs and all these other things. there's obviously other things that are sometimes annoying, right? Like in a bigger company, you have politics going on here and there, but it's part of the course, right? It's just where do you put your emphasis? And I have to say, I'm really happy with where I am and with the balance that I can strike in these different things.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear, being able to kind of be that entrepreneur and leading something like X Labs, where it is kind of that company within a company scenario. Do you feel like you use some of those principles to try to focus on the business and make sure that, you run your business unit like a business and things like that?
Oh, my boss and my CEO wouldn't be happy with me if I were not. They're asking me all the time.
Yep.
What are these resources doing? Like, how do you make this lean and optimal and automate? And like, we're constantly having a business conversation. There's just no way around it.
What do you think the role of AI and machine learning will play in kind of the future of security, analytics, data visualization, all that loaded question? But
yeah, it's interesting. I have so many conversations about AI, and initially I resisted really hard to jump on this AI bandwagon. I was like, AI doesn't exist. And I'm still pretty adamant, like AGI, the generic intelligence, we don't have that yet, right? And it's probably going to be a while, and it's more of a philosophical question when that's going to happen. And Ray Kurzweil has probably a better answer than me. AI, people really use it as a synonym to analytics, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes they use it as a synonym to machine learning, and generally supervised machine learning. So that's really the big topic everybody talks about. I think we have had incredible success with a number of these algorithms that huge advances that we were able to make, right? Deep learning has definitely catapulted a number of different areas very, very far, where things we haven't been able to do before. But I have a feeling that we are over-rotating again on this, where we feel like machine learning is going to solve everything. If we just have the right data, and it will answer all our questions, and that's just not true. And I'm actually seeing a trend where I gave a talk last year at Black Hat where I talked about the dangers of algorithms. Mm-hmm. And I just showed that what we're doing today, a developer can download a library for a machine learning tool set. They can run it on the data and then get a result. And often that's what happens. And they're like, running around is the result that we just came up with. And you put that into critical systems, and that's how the system works in the end. Well, when you actually dig in, you realize, well, there's different parameters you can set for that algorithm. The developer never looked at them, has no idea what the black box just did. And I was showing some examples of how if you just start changing these parameters, you get completely different results. And this is really dangerous. We're running systems based on those kinds of approaches. And so I think we need to be a little careful on how we're using these things. And it's not just educating developers and sort of making sure that they're using the algorithms in the right way and that it's statistically sound and all these things. It's also understanding the data better, right? Where are the biases from the data all the way to the interpretation? People seem to be kind of ignoring that and just like, oh, it's helping us in so many ways, we don't really care. But especially in security, that can be actually fatal in the end. And that's something I feel pretty strongly about, that we need to emphasize and have those conversations. And yeah, so making sure that we're using those things right.
So what technologies are you most excited about going forward? What stuff at Forcepoint and X Labs are you particularly jumping at the bit here?
There's a number of different efforts going on. Lots of new versions of products coming, lots of research that we're working on right now. I'm super excited to, once we have all that research sort of production ready, to start rolling it out and then seeing the results, right? As researchers, we're trying to gather as much data as we can to build our models and test them out. But then once you deploy it to production and you start seeing what actually happens with those models in the big wide world out there and in customer environments, that's when it gets interesting. And we start seeing the nuances and see where we actually catch some of the interesting, say the data leakages or whatever use cases we're implementing. So that's going to be super exciting to start rolling some of these things out. Getting deeper into understanding human behavior. That's been super fun, and getting from talking about it to really the implementations is a lot of the focus right now. So I'm quite excited to see that happening.
All right, let's get into the lightning round. These questions are fast and easy, just like the lightning platform from Salesforce. You can go to salesforce.com/employee experience to learn more about lightning fast employee experience on the world's #1 CRM. Lightning round questions. Are you ready?
Sure. I'm a little scared.
As you should be. No, you're in great hands here. Number 1, what app are you using on your phone that is the most fun?
Was fun. Boggle.
What is your favorite vacation spot?
Still have to go there. Looking forward to go to the Maldives, hopefully sometime soon to scuba.
Favorite use of AI or chatbots that you've seen recently?
Whoa, none.
Favorite book or podcast that you've read or listened to recently?
Obviously very excited to start digging into the mission podcasts more.
Now we're talking. What do you do for fun?
Depends a little bit. I'll say swimming.
Swimming? Still do any target shooting?
No, not really. It's the crossbow and air rifle that I was shooting was quite elaborate in terms of the equipment and the shooting range and everything. I haven't really found a range yet that would even do it.
That's crazy. What's the distance like?
It's 10 or 30 meters.
Oh, wow.
So 10 meter, the target is a 0.5 millimeter. So it's the tip of a needle that's really the bullseye, and you have to hit that.
Jeez. What's your favorite time-saving tool?
Whoa, time-saving. I take a lot of notes and I have a lot of checklists. So I just discovered, ClickUp, I think, which is to like sort of take checklists and stuff. I quite enjoy that.
Best advice for a chief research and intelligence officer?
You're only as good as your people are, right? And I think that's true everywhere. It's invest in the people and make sure that they also sort of bounce off of each other, because everybody has different backgrounds. And I have data scientists that have no security background. I have security people that have no data science background. So making them work together has been a good formula.
What question do you never get asked that you wish you were asked more often?
Oh, well, you know what? It's interesting. Obviously, people can't see this, but I'm wearing mala beads.
Yeah.
And I've been wearing them for probably 6-7 years. Like, I don't leave the house without them. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting how little I get asked about them. I'm not sure if people are just scared of asking a religious question or potentially religious question, but that's probably the question. Why do I wear malas?
Yeah, why do you?
Well, I have a Zen meditation practice for about the last 10 years. I'm not sitting every day for like a half an hour, and I'm not quite that determined, I guess. But it's been a very important companion on my journey in life, and it's been really nice to have a philosophy to come back to that helps you deal with all kinds of different situations. It's very much in line with what we talked about earlier, sort of the shooting. It's an individual sport. You learn certain things about yourself. Zen is very similar in sort of teaching you certain aspects of life and providing some tools for that. So
awesome. This has been great, man. Thanks for coming on the show. Any final thoughts
really
here?
Fun. No, this has been super fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you guys hiring? Yeah, anybody open recs on the team?
Oh yeah, I think I have about 5 different open recs. So from security analysts to data scientists. Look me up. Yeah,
we'll put your Twitter and LinkedIn in the show notes here. Thanks for coming on. This is awesome.
And thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
IT Visionaries is created by the team at mission.org and brought to you by the Salesforce Customer 360 platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Build connected experience, empower every employee, and deliver continuous innovation with the customer at the center of everything you do. Learn more at salesforce.com/platform.